Today we're going to be talking about open segments, and just to differentiate a little bit, open segments are, as the name implies, are segments that have a space in between, as opposed to closed segments. And have an example of a closed segment ring here, where you have a series of glue joints that are glued end to end, with no space obviously in between, so it makes a fairly solid ring. Open segments are a little bit different because you don't have any end joints to glue to. You have open spaces in between, so that you're able to create a little bit of an artistic flair to your turning, and create your own, essentially your own blank. One of the advantages I see, by the way, in segmented wood turning is that if you're dealing with what I call chunk turning, you're really dependent on the quality of the wood that you're able to secure and shape. You don't know what's inside it. With segmented turning, you build your own blank, and that's the major differentiation in them. And it's also a little more economical. You're not using large chunks of wood. You don't have a lot of shavings that go onto the floor. So it's a little more economical. This is an example of an open segment project that combines chunk turning. Obviously, the top and the bottom of this little vase is a solid piece of wood that I cut on. I think it's a 30-degree slant, and inserted an open segment ring into. You can pass that around if you want to. One of the questions that somebody asked at a club meeting several months ago when I had an open segment piece in here is, how do you do that? How do you cut these, and how do you assemble them? Well, it goes back to, we're not going to get real deep in the weeds with pi, but pi is a critical factor in that pi is 3.14, 314, and it actually extends out to a long string of numbers, but 3.14 will usually get you what you want. And so let's say that our bowl diameter, or our ring diameter, let's say that we want 10 inches out of it. So what we do is we take 10 inches times pi, and pi gives us 31.4 inches. That's the circumference of our project. Now, it happens that this particular project is 16 segments per ring. So I want to divide this 31.4 by 16, and that gives us about 1.75 inches per segment. That's what's referred to as the segment edge length. And segment edge length is the determining factor in the diameter of your bowl. And this is just an example. We've actually cut some segments larger than this. It wasn't my project, but it was a guy in the back of the room came up with a project a few years ago. What was it, 6 feet in diameter, Kelly? Yeah, so it's the one where you see Kelly sitting on the floor in the middle of a construction, building the rings around him. But the segment edge length in this one would be 1.75 inches for this particular project. And because we're dividing 360 by 18, because we've got 18 segments, that gives us about 20 degrees per segment. So we divide 360 by 18, it gives us 20. And so that would construct this solid ring. Now, the solid ring we really can't use, except it'll be the top ring in this particular case. I need to figure out the segment edge length for the open segments, and there are really generally 2 ways to do that. In most cases, people will use a number of degrees. So since I have 20 degrees for a closed segment, I want a 4-degree separation between them. So it comes down to 16 degrees. The other way to do it is to use a percentage. And in a lot of cases, segment internals will use a percentage like 20%. They want a 20% gap in the segments. Well, it just happens that 20% gap and 4 degrees work out to about the same thing. So in this case, our segment edge length would be 1.4 inches, thereabouts. It's actually something like in some number of 30 seconds, but 1.4 inches is close. And one of the things that you probably have heard or figured out by now is that in closed segment work, you have to be fairly precise about the length of the segment and the angles, especially the angles. Because if the angles are off just a fraction of a degree, by the time you get 16 segments that have the same error in them, you don't have a tenth of a degree angle error. You have a 1.6 degree error, and that will create a pretty sizable gap by the time you get your ring glued up. In open segment work, that degree really doesn't make much difference because you're not doing end grain joints. So you can be off, half a degree or a quarter of a degree. You can actually have quite a variance in the open segments, and it's not really going to be detectable to most people. Somebody that's really into segmented wood turning and open segments will be able to look at it and say, yeah, that was screwed up. They messed up on the angle there, but most people aren't going to catch that. So how do you cut the segments? Well, a lot of guys use a miter saw. Some people use band saw. We use the band saw here for the closed segment classes that I do. And my preference is to use the table saw with something called a wedgie sled. And this is the wedgie sled that I use. It's simply 2 arms that are riding in a track in this case, and I can adjust the angle of the cut by moving the arms. And for the 18 segment bowl that we have here, this would be the wedge that I used to construct it. And once the wedge is set so that it's tight against both arms of the wedgie sled, obviously pull the wedge out. You can pass that around if you want to look at it. And your wood stock goes against one arm. You make the cut, move it to the other arm, and make the cut again. You've got a stop block on the other side of the blade that determines the length. And there's a common misconception that you have to flip the stock, the wood strip. With the wedgie sled, you do not do that. You keep the same side up all the time because doing it that way, if there's any error on one side of the sled, the other side of the sled cancels it out. So you go ahead and cut your segments, and then this is for the closed segment. But we calculated that we need to have a 4-degree separation between the segments. So I have the second wedge is for open segments, and gee, it doesn't quite fit. But if I adjust here, about like so, this gives me the correct angle for the segments in this particular project, and I would reset the edge length with a stop on the other side so that I'm able to control the length of it. To, in this case, would be 1.4 inches. Stop on the other side. A lot of people just use in some cases they'll use the fence on their table saw as a stop. It's a little bit hard to get an exact setting on that if you need it. Other people will make a block of wood that has a magnet or something that attaches. Some will write it into the miter track on their table saw. I use a digital stop that mounts in the track on the table saw and has the wood goes against here, and I use the little digital gauge to set the length on it. And this proves to be pretty accurate. And these little digital calipers, they run about, I think, about $10 on Amazon. So this works for me. You can spend a lot of money on a sled system that has a built-in digital. The one that I'm thinking of in particular runs around $300. I think in my sled system for my stop block and everything, I probably have maybe $20. I've never really stopped to figure it out. Pardon? Oh, sure. You can even turn it on if you want. I don't know if the battery's any good in it or not, but anyway. So when we set up on the lathe, yeah, yeah,
I understand the segment length
yes,
is very important for the diameter of the ring.
yes, it is.
Then, based on the number of segments you want, the angle is very important to make those meet. If you're inserting an open segment, why is that angle? Why is that angle important?
Exactly. It really isn't that important. You want to come close because, like I say, if you distribute it, a piece to, the general public, man on the street, they're not going to know the difference. If you have a piece that has angles that are a significant variance with where they're supposed to be, and you show that piece to Malcolm Tibbetts or Kurt Theobald or somebody like that, they'll write you up for it. I mean,
So if I'm cutting symmetrical, right? If I use 20 degrees
yeah.
and I put my gap in,
Mm-hmm.
they're all 20 degrees.
Right.
Really, the only problem is right now I got a 10-inch circle with a 20-degree. The gap's gonna make that 10-inch circle bigger, right?
Not necessarily. No. If your segment edge length is cut to the right length, it doesn't have to be.
So if you took the 20% off the edge length,
Right.
that would give you the correct gap.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Really all you're looking at then is the angle of what is it comes through the set.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And by the way, full disclosure here, you saw me using a little whiteboard. I'm not Carl Rove, so I don't do these whiteboards real well. But I cheat. I use software to do the calculations for me. I can do them manually, and every once in a while I'll sit down and work one out, just to make sure that I can still do it, and to verify that the computer program did what I expected it to. But the software that I use, it's called Woodturner Pro. It's one of a number of packages that are out there. And software packages, Woodturner Pro is one of many that are available on the marketplace. And I think, if I remember right, I think it licenses for like $60 or something like that. There are a number of free apps that are available. There are apps that are available for both your PC desktop, your tablet, or your cell phone. And a lot of guys will actually do the calculations and stuff on their cell phone, because once you've got the calculation for a ring done, you really don't need to keep a record of it. I do print the stuff out for every one of my projects. I do do if you will, a printed or a digital version of a print for future records, because this particular piece, I don't know how many of these I've done. I never do one alone. I always do them in multiples of 2 or 4. And these have actually sold fairly well at craft shows. So, by keeping a paper record or a digital record that I can reproduce, it makes it a lot faster. I don't have to do the calculations all over again. So now we've got our segments cut, and we wind up with something like this, a bag full of segments. What do we do with them? Well, one of the critical things to me is a good index wheel. And the index wheel that I'm using here is one from Chefware Kits. It's a steel wheel that has a number of different combinations that you can use in your turnings for the number of holes, because the number of holes relates in most cases to the number of degrees that your segmented project is going to use. In this particular case, since I'm doing 18 segments, I'm using the second row, which actually is 72. Why 72? Well, the indexing systems, you have to have a wheel that sets up to use the number of segments in a multiple of either 2 or 4. So the reason for that is that I'm doing alternate rows where in the project the top row here is one setting on the index wheel. The second row below that has to be, in this case, number of degrees off to be able to recenter it. So if I am installing the wheel on, you'll notice that I've got it marked with red, in this case, red and black dots around the holes. The project that we're going to be finishing up today, I'm going to be using, I think, the red dots. The black dots would do the alternate row below that or above it. I don't know if I'm explaining that well or not. Yes?
You're talking about the glue up part.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You need the same multiple pieces you're putting together.
Exactly.
It has to have, two, three, or four extra holes in that rotation so that you can constantly change the glue up as you rotate.
Exactly. Exactly. And the reason that I'm using 72 is that 72 gives me a clear gap between the two markings, between the black and the red markings. And, I could probably, with this one, I could use 36, but that's a little bit close together. And I don't, frankly, this wheel won't accommodate 36 holes. The minimum that it'll do is 48. Now, there are other options for that. This is a homemade wheel, and this is a remake of one that I did a number of years ago. This one is actually was done on a laser, but you can see I've done the same thing here, where I've got a red dot and a blue dot, and those indicate the different settings for the different levels or the different rows. Pass that around clean.
That's just your offset on your glue.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So put the you want to make sure that the chuck is on nice and snug, because if the chuck slips, the wheel doesn't necessarily move, or vice versa. If the wheel moves, the chuck doesn't necessarily slip, and you lose your registration. But I tighten it down nice and tight, and open the chuck up. How about if we use the project itself? I'm just testing to see if you guys are paying attention. Yep. Oh, about 3 years ago, I think. Chefware Kits.
79 now is
Yeah. they've come down in price. They were 99 when I bought mine. But you have one of my wheels, don't you? Yeah, yeah, it worked. Yeah. So what do we do with this? Well, um, that's where this little doodad comes in handy. Oh, this, by the way, is a way that I keep the index wheel and the chuck from spinning out of registration. This goes into between the bedways and the lathe. And I'm going to set the rod on this little jig so that it's engaged in one of the holes that I'm going to be using on the index wheel. And tighten her down. And now I have a way to restrain. This won't turn. If I pull the rod out and let it put it into the next hole, it holds my registration. And this is just a replacement for the tool rest that will support the table that I'm going to use. Pardon? I don't keep count. I keep making jigs until I don't need any anymore. Well, most of this stuff is available, like the table that I'm installing here. This is available commercially. This table was actually invented by a gentleman named Earl Rasmussen. And Earl is a segmenter that lives down, I think he lives in one of the Carolinas someplace. And he was pretty generous. What he did is he invented this table, and then he gave the rights to the invention to Chefware Kits because he wanted to share it with everybody else. I don't know that I would be that generous, but yeah, maybe I would. I don't know. Okay, so I think we're about ready to fly here. And by the way, normally you don't have to go through this, but when you move the project from one lathe to another, remove the project, you do have to reset the indexing on this system. But you'd have to do that with anybody else's system as well. Okay, so how do we glue this together? Well, you may not have noticed, because I didn't show it to you, there's a little brass stop that goes on the aluminum edge here. And this little brass stop is where you actually set your segment against. I'm going to put it back on here so I'm in the right place. Yeah, that's actually what it is. Somebody is selling these online for $20 a piece. You can go to Menards and buy them for what, $3.95 or something for a pack of 4. Uh, but you know, and it just happens that I have a number of segments that I need, to complete this. That is, if I can get the bag open. And one thing that's really to me is important is the glue that you choose. Now you can use any glue that you want. A lot of people use Tite Bond 1. Kurt Theobald, one of the foremost segmented wood turners in the country, he uses nothing but Tite Bond Original. But he's got a lot of time. He's got a lot of stuff that he's always got in progress, so he's always is always able to keep busy. I like something that sets up fast and works, very quickly. So I have started using Tite Bond's Quick and Thick. Quick and Thick is, I'm not sure exactly what they designed it for, but this stuff will actually start to tack up in about 15 seconds. Now that doesn't mean that it's dry, but what it means is that it's tacked up enough that you're able actually to go on to the next, to glue on the next piece. And it doesn't take very long, only a few minutes, until you're actually able to work with it a little bit, including doing a little bit of sanding, which we'll do here in a few minutes. The little carrier that I have for it, this is a glue carrier from Rockler. And their vision of this is that you would attach it to the leg of your workbench or something. I'm not going to attach anything permanently to the lathe because this is cast iron. I'm not going to drill into it. And I like to be able to move this around so it has a rare earth magnet on the bottom. That way I always know where it is. It's stuck right where I put it. And yeah. Here we go. I keep a paper towel handy just in case I, go nuts and squirt glue all over the place. And I'm doing a little bit of a test fit here just to make sure that I've got things lined up the way that I want them. Now, one of the nice things about Thick and Quick, it also dries clear. It will leave a little bit of residue behind, but since it's drying clear, that's usually not a problem. And you'll see some guys, especially some of the YouTubers, that'll really slather on a lot of glue. You don't need a lot of glue. What you need is a little tiny bit of glue in the right place. And then you use your digital glue spreader and spread it around a little bit. And I keep a paper towel taped down to the tabletop so that I can wipe off the excess. And put it in place and hold it. And I'm counting silently to myself. We're at about, 10 seconds now? Okay. Yeah, there we go. We'll go on to the next piece. And the next piece is what do you think? Have we hit 15 seconds yet? I think so. Yeah. Okay. Now, this is going pretty quick. And in all honesty, it doesn't always go this quick. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. but it's not uncommon for me to be able to build one of these projects in usually about 3 to 4 hours. And that's, from the time when I start from the faceplate. By the way, this is mounted on a chuck. Normally I'm on a faceplate. But from the time I start on the faceplate with the bottom ring until I get up to the top ring, this is an open bowl, so I'm doing the entire bowl in one pass. So it's actually it'll be a one-piece blank. If it's a closed segment, or a closed bowl that has, like a vase or something like that, I will ordinarily do those in multiple projects. So I'll have one, the bottom of it built on one faceplate, the top on another faceplate, and in the case, for instance, of the little vase that we passed around earlier, the open segment portion of it was built on a separate faceplate and then wedged in between the two halves of the project. And right now, we're probably are good, to go on and let this sit for a minute. Yeah, usually, yeah. My faceplates all have a sacrificial block on them. And in most cases, if the sacrificial blocks, by the way, in your faceplate, don't use plywood and don't use construction lumber or softwood like pine. You always want to go with a hardwood. And my faceplate sacrificial blocks are all either maple or ash. Very seldom will I ever use anything else, but a lot of it has to do with what you have laying around the shop. But the reason you don't want to use plywood delaminates. And there's nothing more scary than having a piece spinning on the lathe at 1500 RPMs on a faceplate that's got a plywood sacrificial block and have the plywood decide to come apart on you. And it does happen. The softwoods, same way. You're in most cases, your base for your segmented project is going to be a hardwood usually. And if you're gluing up against a softwood, you do have the potential for it, especially if you get a good catch, which nobody ever gets catches, right? But in the off chance that you do get a catch, it is possible for that glue joint, the glue joint is stronger than the wood, so something's got to give, and what it's going to do is it's going to tear the grain out on the softwood. So I always use hardwood. As a matter of fact, this has a glue block on the bottom of it that I put a tenon on. And to be honest with you, the only reason that I did this, I didn't have a small faceplate available when I started this project. I had them all tied up with something else. I've got a couple of big faceplates, but I like to use my favorite faceplate is by Easy Wood Tools. It's an aluminum faceplate, and I think it's 3 or 3.5 inches in diameter. I wind up using those more than anything else. I've got 5 or 6 of them, I think. So anyway, oh, never hot glue. I don't, I know a lot of people use hot glue, and a lot of people swear by it, and it probably works okay for them. I don't trust it because you can peel it off. And the other glue that I know Lyle Jameson is real big on this. He uses cyanoacrylate CA glue, super glue, and I don't trust that because for the same reason that I don't use super glue to build a segmented project. It would be possible to build these projects with super glue, and you might be able to get away with it. But the thing you got to remember about super glue is it doesn't have any tensile strength. It becomes, especially if you use accelerator with it, it becomes brittle, and it has a considerable amount of impact strength, but it doesn't have any. Am I saying that right? Yeah, it gets brittle, and then it'll crack. It'll break right off. An example of that would be a British woodworker named Paul Sellers. Doesn't do turning work, but he had a video recently where he showed how he planes thin slices of wood. And what he does is he takes a little bit of super glue on the end of just on one end of the wood, lays down a piece of painter's tape on his bench, and super glues one end of that to the painter's tape, and that'll hold it. But when he gets done planing the piece, he's got this little tiny end of it that's glued down with super glue. All he did is he peeled it up and took a chisel and scraped the super glue right off, because it doesn't have any tensile strength. It breaks away. So, for gluing the face plates onto the base of the piece, I always use Titebond 1. Titebond Original is probably still the best glue for most woodworking. I go wood to wood. You can get away with using, like a grocery bag. That makes a joint that will separate. But again, if you get a good solid catch, I've never had that happen to me, and I have used the grocery bag method. But if you get a good solid catch, theoretically it could tear loose. I tend to be a belt and suspenders guy. In that respect, I like to have the good solid wood joint that I know is going to hold up well. And the Titebond Original glue joints are stronger than the wood. There's no question about that. So before we finish this project off, there are other ways to glue these segments on. One of the most popular, and I think we have some folks here that are using something similar to this, is a wheel. And this is a homemade wheel, but this one does in fact work. I don't think I'm going to build a lot of projects with it, but I wanted to experiment with this to see, what kind of results I could get. The wheel, in this particular case, this is an 18 segment wheel that has a 4-degree gap between the segments. I'm only going to put a couple of these in. But what you do with this wheel is you take your segment and slide it in and jam it into the wheel. And then you do the next one, and so on and so forth. And when you get it all populated around, you make sure that they're all nice and snug in there, and then you apply glue to it. And with glue applied to it, the segments will stay in place. And you bring it up against your project and use your tailstock to secure it in place. And only do that until the glue starts to tack. Then you pull the tailstock away and pull the wheel away, and theoretically your segments will all stay in place. I think we have some folks in the club that are using a wheel like. Do you have one, Al? Somebody has one. They have a manufactured version. The mistake I made with this one, I used 1/4-inch plywood. I should have used 3/8 or 1/2-inch plywood. It would have given me a lot more purchase in here to hold the segments in place. But it does work. And another method for building these is a similar wheel, only the similar wheel has like a 1-inch or 1.25-inch hole in the middle of it that goes down over something called a stomper, exactly. And there's the homemade version of the stomper is kind of interesting because you go to Home Depot to buy the supplies for it. The homemade version of the stomper uses a pop-up sprinkler from the Home and Garden section. And I built one of those years ago, and it does work. What it does is it's a spring-loaded rod that comes up through the center of your wheel. And as you put the segments around in the wheel, and then bring the stomper down with your project on it, you put a weight on it, and you've already glued your segments up, and it works pretty well. The only problem that I had with the version of the stomper that I built, as I got taller with the project, I got too much wobble. And the other problem with it is I have a really small shop. My shop is 14 by 23. And, if you're going to use the stomper a lot, you got to have it pretty much permanently installed in a workbench or a table. And I didn't have room for it. So I gave up on the stomper. I still got it, but I don't use it. Another common way, pass that around. People want to take a look at it. Another common way to build segmented projects is with a press. And the press, well, there are all kinds of different versions of the ring press. Mine kind of looks like a medieval torture device. It's got, big arms that come up and a big platform, and it's got a screw that comes down in it. And I've used the press some. I've done some of the, what's referred to as bolt from a board, where you have a glued up board or a solid board of a given dimension that you do a number of concentric cuts in at different angles, and then you reverse them so that you're able to stack those up and build rings out of them. And, the glue press works pretty well for that, but I've never really seen much of an application for the glue press to do this kind of a project. So, and there are other variables and variances in those, but those are really the most common ways to do it. There's a fella in Duluth that perfected a jig system that if you're a jig fanatic, it's to die for. It's a beautiful system. It's built out of aluminum extrusions, and it's got digital components and everything else. But it was also pretty expensive. I think it was around $500 for his system. But his system is used mostly for what you would refer to probably as high density segmented turnings. And those are the guys that are putting 3,500, 4,000, 5,000 pieces of wood into a project. And those are all, for the most part, are all closed segment projects. Very few of them are putting any gaps in between them. But, that's another jig that's used quite commonly. Getting back to the subject of jigs, we got to use another jig to put the top on this. Nice transition, huh? This has to fit on here somehow. So what we're going to do, we're going to find the midpoint on one of these segments. Why do I want to find the midpoint? Well, you get the greatest strength by having face grain to face grain contact, and you want to avoid it because in this case we've got end joints, end grain that's glued together. We want to minimize the weakness here, which means we want to have glue surface here and here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my little self-centering ruler, and yeah, this is something that I make. It's a jig. I had to say that before Lynn came up with it. So I'm going to find one of the maple segments, and I'm going to use the little self-centering ruler to find the middle on it. It would be about there. And I'm going to mark that. And put an X on it so I can find it easier. So a couple of ways to do this. Some people will use cold jaws. And cold jaws work just fine. I've got a set of cold jaws that I make some use of. But the truth of the matter is, I'm really only interested in finding a way to be able to get this up to the project and get it in place long enough for the glue to tack up. And cold jaws can take a while to set up. You have a lot of bolts to maneuver around. You have to put a chuck on your tailstock and so forth. So for me, an easier way to do it is with something like this. This is nothing more than a piece of, I think this was a 2x12, that I embedded a bolt into. And the bolt happens to match the threads on my tailstock. These, if you're using either a robust tailstock or a one-way or Powermatic or Jet, they all have the same thread configuration. These are 3/4 by 10, 3/4 inch, 10 threads per inch. It just happens that all of the box stores in our area, in their hardware department, stock 3/4 10 bolts, nuts rather, and they're fairly cheap. So you're not spending a lot of money to make one of these. And what I do is I cut a rough circle on the bandsaw out of construction lumber, drill a hole in it, embed the bolt into the hole, epoxy it in, and once the epoxy is dried, then I put it on the lathe. I have a little mandrel that I built for the headstock, so I can turn it around and turn it to a shape I want. I think these are, for the most part, I angle these at about 30 or 35 degrees, something like that. And these make, nice centering cones, and you can make as many of them as you want in different sizes. I have a full set. This is the next to the largest one. The next size larger is about 10 inches or so in diameter. This one I think is about 8.5 or 9. This is a smaller one. I've got a bunch of these that I made. They're cheap to make, they're fast, and they actually do a pretty nice job for you. Oops. Yeah, I got it. I thought I'd be able to get by with using that, but I'll have to take out one of the tools here. And what I'm doing is I'm just, by eyeballing it, I'm lining up the glue joint with the mark that I made at the midpoint in that maple segment. Yeah, it looks like we're about right there. So now, a lot of people at this point would just go ahead and put the glue on. And pardon me? In the whole construction, it's 18 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 18 times 8, whatever that works out to. Yeah, 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 yeah. Counting the ring. A lot of people would just go ahead and put the glue on and be done with it. And this stuff was all surfaced on my drum sander before I cut it. But there can be some minor variance depending on even the thickness of the glue. You want as tight a glue joint as you can possibly get. That's one of the things I learned from, I mentioned Kurt Theobald a couple of times. And a few years ago, we had Kurt in here for an evening program where he did a slideshow, which essentially was a tour of his workshop. He has more sanders than anybody that I've ever seen. He sands everything, and he sands and sands and sands until he gets as perfect a surface as he can possibly get, which is probably one of the reasons why his turnings will go for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 because the perfection that is put into them. I'm not going to go to that extent, but I am going to sand this. And the one thing I forgot to bring I forgot to bring chalk. What I will normally do is I'll take my grandson's driveway chalk. Yeah, he misses it. He doesn't know what happened to it. I take my grandson's driveway chalk and chalk around the ring so that I can, I can see where I've got any irregularities in the surface. So I didn't bring the driveway chalk with me, but I think I can come fairly close here. And it's nothing more than a piece of MDF with 100 grit sandpaper on it. And I'm running about 300 RPMs. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but the sound is changing as it sands down, as it gets smoother. Actually, what I could do, it's not as much fun as a driveway chalk, but it works. You remember? Yeah, yeah. Several years ago, I was looking for a flashlight in my shop. Couldn't find it. A couple of weeks later, I went over to my daughter's house. I went into Ryan's bedroom, and there it was sitting on his dresser. I guess he needed it worse than I did. Yeah, right. Okay, I'll buy that. Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. You know, I want to be able to at least have one of the surface. And by the way, this was drum sanded, and it won't pick up on the camera, but you can see the squeeze out in the glue joints on one side. On the other side, it's perfectly smooth. I only sanded one side of this. Why did I only sand one side? Because I can do the other side when I finish the bowl. And I usually will make the top ring a little bit thicker than it needs to be in case I have some kind of an issue, like get a catch or a chip out or something like that. I've got a little bit of extra to play with there. So, well, it'll be workable for a little while longer than that. Um, there probably are some shortcuts that you could take in doing this, but I haven't found any of them yet. I think I'm gonna need a little more juice. Yeah, actually, that'd be a good idea. Yeah. Okay. Let it tack for a few seconds here. And what do you do with squeeze out? Because you're going to get some squeeze out. And one of the advantages in the glue that I'm using is it does dry clear, so the squeeze out is not going to be as apparent. But still, if you get sloppy, and sometimes you're going to get sloppy with it, you're going to get squeeze out that you may want to take off. Don't worry about squeeze out on the outside because it's going to be turned away anyway. These segments I think were cut to ½ inch thick, most of them. This bowl is going to wind up being somewhere under a quarter, probably about 3/16 of an inch thick. So I don't worry about the squeeze out, on the outside, but in between the segments, take a little thing. This is a palette knife. You can buy these at Hobby Lobby has them. Michael's has them. Amazon has loads of them, and they're cheap. I just take a little palette knife and go in and scrape out any place where I see any squeeze out. And by this time, the glue has started to set up enough that it comes off in a nice gummy format, so it doesn't smear. Another thing I like about Quick and Thick is it's easy to clean up. And I'm at the point now where I want to put a little more pressure on the ring, but I don't want to keep cranking the tailstock in because, this is a cone. It's going to, put pressure on those glue joints, and you theoretically, could pop the glue joints apart. So what I do when I make these uh, cones, the other side, that's why I drill all the way through. The other side is drilled slightly larger. Uh, it fits over the threads. And now I can put as much pressure as I feel I need to put on. And I'll let it sit like that for a while. And while I'm doing that, I clean up the shop and get ready for the next project. What have I left out? Anything that anybody can think of or any questions? Yeah, yeah, outer. Yeah, it's outer. Um, Inner diameter takes care of itself with the angle that you cut. And it's not a bad idea uh, to overcut the width of your segments. Give yourself a little more room to work with because if you do have a problem of some kind, you get a catch or something like that. Uh, if you made your segments a little bit wider, your wall thickness starting out may be a little more than you want, but you have some flexibility. The other thing that I think is kind of a common mistake that a lot of people make. You see in Earl Rasmussen, the open segment guy that I mentioned earlier that invented this jig that I use, he makes what I think is kind of a mistake. He turns the inside first. How many of you, when you look at a bowl, look at the inside first? I look at the outside. I'm concerned about the outside diameter, the form of it. If you're turning the inside first, you're limiting your options for the form of the piece. And, you know, regardless of any of the technology, the number of segments you have, the variances of wood, the thing that people see first is the form of the piece. So when I turn this one, and it'll probably be a while before I get back to it, I'm not going to do anything with the inside until I've got the outside shaped the way that I want it. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, um, I'm not going to disagree with you there. A lot of it comes down to what works best for you. But what works best for me is doing the outside first, because I like to see the form first, form develop. And if you've left yourself enough margin in the thickness of the walls or the width of the segments, in doing inside first would probably work pretty well. But I've gotten to the point where I calculate them actually pretty close. This is about as much leeway as I give myself, and I'm not taking off. I'm taking off probably a little more than an eighth of an inch on each side, on both the inside and the outside. So when you get down, to that close, I think it makes a lot of sense to do the outside first. And one of the other things is what do you do if you have nobody ever does this, but if you run into somebody that does do it, what if you make a mistake in the calculations and you find out that that mistake is here instead of here? Uh, the only real solution that you have there is to use a parting tool and take it off and recreate that ring and save the rest of it. One of the things that I've done a few times when I've had a calculation error where I've basically have spaced it when I'm setting up a table saw and have set the wrong width, or used a piece the wrong length or something. Um, Most of the time, if I make a mistake like that, I'll catch it before I get to the glue up stage. But if it gets to the glue up stage, the only choice I really have is to part it off and retune the part of it that I can save. And if the top, the other portion, if there's enough salvageable there to work with, then I'll actually turn it into a second project on a separate faceplate and turn it separately. I've done that quite a few times. Anybody else? Okay.
I by no means have made large quantities of this,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure my quality is subpar to yours, Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
I simply reduce the diameter of my ring by the thickness of a piece of scrap wood that I have,
Mm-hmm.
and I glue my segments together with that scrap wood between them.
Yep.
Split it out, glue the next one, split it
Mm-hmm.
out.
You can do that. Yeah, that would work. Yeah, I'm not sure what degree of precision you can get with it, but yeah,
Admittedly,
yeah,
we have to watch how far the piece gets off center.
yeah.
But I mean, I left it thick enough where I turned most of the mistakes away.
Uh, See, that's the other. You can turn the mistakes away with this, and if you make too much of a mistake, put in another piece of wood and do it again. Jerry? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Huh. Well, it comes down to this. There's no right way or wrong way to do this stuff. There are just different ways, and some work better than others, and some work for some people and don't work for others. That's what I found out. I belong to the segment of Woodturners Club, and I go to their symposiums every 2 years, and I see some of this stuff. Like there's a guy named Eli Polite uh, that does incredible detailed stuff, and I look at his stuff and I figure, how in the world did he do that? And he won't tell you. Yeah, yeah. So, anybody else? I'm sorry. Oh, oh, the thickness? Um, these are 5/8 of an inch high, and this one happens to be 3/4 of an inch long. This is from a different ring down in the inside of the bowl. But uh, these 5/8, these are actually from a different project. These are cut at these are 9/16. Uh, so they're a little bit taller, a little bit thicker, and the width on these, I think these are all about the same. The width on this is uh, 15/16, just a little bit less than an inch. No, no, not really. Um, it, you know, it does you got to consider though that the curve for your table saw is taking out some when you rip them down to size and so forth. But it is more economical wood-wise. For instance, I can get a bowl this size out of a piece of maple with this configuration. A piece of maple that's about 3 feet long and 4 inches wide. And the walnut portion of it would be a little more than half that. So I'm not using a whole lot of wood. I'm using probably under 2 board feet. So it's pretty economical to do a design like this. And like the guys that are doing the high density stuff, they use quite a bit more wood, but what they do is they stack them because they're using segments that are basically the size of matchsticks, and they'll stack them so that they're going through 10 thicknesses of wood at a time. And most of them are using a version of the wedgie sled. There are different versions of it that you can make. The interesting thing I found though is that one of the leading segmented turners in the world is a guy named Malcolm Tibbetts. Malcolm lives out in Nevada, and uh, he uses a chop saw. And I thought, wow, how does he do this? But his chop saw is a Festool Capex Pro chop saw, and he's probably really got that thing tuned up down to the gnat's hair. But he uses a chop saw for most of his stuff. He does have a table saw in the shop that he can use occasionally, but most of his pieces are done with the chop saw. My chop saw I use some if I'm doing a feature ring, for example, where I'm going to do like the Indian blanket style inlays and stuff like that. Those are fairly easy to do with a chop saw because most of those are done at 30, 35, or 40 degrees. With some of your segmenting work, depending on the size of the ring and the number of segments in the ring, you're getting down to one of them is 11.25 degrees. I can't get my chop saw dialed into 11.25 degrees. The closest I can come is 22 and a half. But if you're doing precision work like that, that little bit of variance makes a tremendous amount of work. And I can do it on the table saw, but I can't do it on the chop saw. Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 It's interesting to watch Theobald's presentation, and he was also did a presentation at our last segment of wood turning symposium, and he sands and sands and sands, but it's how he gets the perfect fit. I don't have that much patience. That's why, somebody's, suggested a couple times that I had to, start doing some of these, real high density things. We used to have a guy in the club named Bob Beaupre. Some of you may remember him. Bob lives out in Arizona now. He does some real high density stuff. Uh, he had one that was like 4,800 pieces. He did a demo that showed how he assembles it at our Woodworkers Guild several years ago. And it's beautiful work, but it takes months to do. And I don't have the patience for that. You know, he does, and God bless him, but I'm not going to try it. I'm still trying for the instant gratification from wood turning. Yeah, when I got into woodworking, I started taking cabinet building or furniture building classes, and that was good, you know, because I built a number of pieces of furniture along the way, but it takes forever. And then, kind of by accident, I got involved in one night at a class. The instructor set me up on a lathe, and I thought, "Wow, this is really cool." You know, because I'm ready to fall into the vortex because I can take a piece of wood, and a half an hour later, I can have something out of it. So it was the instant gratification that got me hooked on wood turning. Then I got into segmenting, and the instant gratification was gone. And then you get into open segmenting, and the instant gratification disappears a little bit. It disappears a little bit more.